There is a moment that many people experience at some point in their lives when they notice a quiet but powerful change in their behavior. Situations arise where they would once have explained themselves carefully, clarified their intentions, or tried to correct misunderstandings. Yet now, something feels different. Instead of explaining, they simply remain silent. They allow the misunderstanding to exist without trying to correct it. This shift can confuse the people around them. Friends or colleagues may interpret the silence as indifference, stubbornness, or emotional distance. But in many cases, the change has nothing to do with losing the ability to communicate. Instead, it reflects a deeper realization about how explanations actually function within human relationships. When people are younger, they often believe that misunderstandings happen simply because others lack enough information. If someone misinterprets their actions, they assume that a clear explanation will solve the problem. Words seem like tools capable of restoring accuracy to any situation. This belief encourages people to explain themselves frequently. They clarify their motives, justify their decisions, and carefully describe what they truly meant during conversations. For a time, this approach appears effective. Explanations resolve small misunderstandings and maintain harmony in relationships. But as individuals accumulate more life experience, they begin noticing something surprising about how people interpret explanations. The reaction to an explanation often depends less on the information being provided and more on the perspective of the person receiving it. Two people can hear the same explanation and interpret it in completely different ways. One may accept it as clarification, while the other may reinterpret it as an excuse. Over time, this realization becomes difficult to ignore. Individuals begin recognizing that explanations do not always change how others see them. In many cases, people interpret explanations through beliefs they already hold. If someone already trusts the individual, the explanation may feel reasonable. If someone already doubts the individual, the same explanation may appear suspicious. This pattern reveals an uncomfortable truth about communication. Understanding does not depend solely on how clearly something is explained. It also depends on whether the listener is willing to see the explanation as valid. Once individuals begin noticing this pattern repeatedly, their motivation to explain everything begins to weaken. They realize that some misunderstandings exist not because information is missing, but because perspectives are fixed. In these situations, explaining repeatedly may only lead to frustration rather than clarity. Another factor contributing to this change involves emotional energy. Explaining oneself requires effort. It involves organizing thoughts, anticipating questions, and responding to reactions that may follow. When someone spends years trying to ensure that others fully understand their intentions, the process can become exhausting. Each explanation requires emotional patience and mental focus. Over time, individuals may begin asking themselves whether every misunderstanding truly deserves that level of attention. They start recognizing that some situations resolve naturally without explanation. Others persist regardless of how much clarification is provided. This awareness gradually shifts their priorities. Instead of explaining every decision, they begin choosing carefully which situations are worth the effort. Silence becomes a deliberate choice rather than an inability to communicate. There is also a deeper psychological transformation involved in this shift. When people are younger, external interpretation often carries significant emotional weight. Being misunderstood can feel threatening because it challenges how others perceive their identity. As individuals mature, their relationship with external perception sometimes changes. They begin realizing that identity does not always need constant validation from others. Misunderstandings may still feel uncomfortable, but they no longer feel catastrophic. This shift reduces the urgency to correct every inaccurate assumption. The individual becomes more comfortable allowing others to hold incomplete or even incorrect interpretations. Silence becomes a form of emotional independence. It reflects a confidence that personal truth does not disappear simply because someone else misunderstands it. As individuals become more comfortable with this quieter approach to communication, they often discover something unexpected about how explanations influence relationships. In many social environments, explanations can unintentionally reinforce the very misunderstandings they are meant to resolve. When someone repeatedly defends their intentions, listeners may begin focusing more on the defense than on the original situation. The conversation shifts from understanding behavior to evaluating credibility. Instead of clarifying the situation, the explanation becomes part of a debate about whether the explanation itself should be believed. Recognizing this dynamic can transform how individuals approach communication. They begin understanding that explanations are most effective when they are offered within environments where mutual understanding already exists. In relationships built on trust, explanations feel natural and constructive, but in environments where suspicion or competition dominates, explanations can quickly become arguments. Over time, individuals learn to distinguish between these two environments. They become more willing to explain themselves within relationships that demonstrate genuine curiosity and respect. At the same time, they may withdraw explanations from environments where words are consistently reinterpreted or challenged. Another important realization emerges during this process. Silence can sometimes communicate clarity more effectively than extended explanation. When someone remains calm in the presence of misunderstanding, their behavior signals a different kind of confidence. Instead of attempting to control how others interpret the situation, they allow their actions over time to speak for themselves. Consistency becomes a more powerful form of communication than repeated justification. Observers who pay attention to patterns of behavior eventually recognize this consistency even if individual moments remain misunderstood. This shift from explanation to demonstration often marks a deeper stage of emotional maturity. The individual stops trying to manage every interpretation in the present moment and instead focuses on maintaining alignment between values and actions over time. Another transformation occurs in how individuals interpret the opinions of others. Early in life, people often assume that every misunderstanding requires immediate correction because it might influence reputation or social standing. But experience gradually reveals that reputations are shaped less by isolated moments and more by long-term patterns of behavior. A single misunderstanding rarely defines a person permanently unless it aligns with repeated behavior. This awareness reduces the urgency to respond to every inaccurate assumption. Individuals begin trusting that consistent actions will gradually shape how they are perceived. Silence becomes a way of conserving energy for situations that truly require attention. There is also a philosophical dimension to this shift. Human perception is inherently limited. Every individual interprets the world through personal experiences, expectations, and emotional history. Because of this, complete agreement about motives or intentions is rarely possible. Accepting this limitation allows individuals to release the pressure of universal understanding. Instead of trying to ensure that everyone sees them accurately, they focus on living in a way that feels authentic to their own principles. Misunderstandings may still occur, but they no longer dominate emotional attention. The individual recognizes that clarity does not require unanimous interpretation. Ultimately, the decision to stop explaining everything does not mean abandoning communication altogether. It represents a more selective approach to when and how communication occurs. Explanations remain valuable in relationships where curiosity and trust exist. But in situations where explanations only fuel further debate, silence becomes a form of wisdom. The individual learns that not every question requires an answer, and not every assumption requires correction. Sometimes the most effective response is simply to continue living in alignment with one's values and allow time to reveal the truth more clearly than any explanation could.